The following video is something I really enjoyed making, and this is about polarity mapping and polarity thinking. And it's so relevant in our daily life, and it pops up everything we do, and in the news, in our communication, in our interactions. So therefore, understanding polarity mapping as a thinking skill is going to really help you a lot as a student, as a young professional, even later in life. It doesn't matter. Polarity thinking is something that's completely overlooked by many people. So therefore, this introduction on this topic. Now, polarities you find everywhere. Even in literature, for example, this book from Tolstoy, War and Peace. I mean, you cannot imagine a bigger polarity as war and peace, but you find it everywhere you look. And the more you're aware of it, the better you become. So there are certain benefits of this technique. Is it will start giving you clarity in position A and position B, and you will start getting an overview and also direction. So it is very much about getting a clear view forward, about getting an overview of what's being discussed, and also what you're thinking yourself and what your position is. And therefore, this great tool of polarity thinking, polarity mapping, and also the dynamics around that. Now, before we dive deeper, there is something that I need to point out. There is a so-called duality and non-duality. Dualism is about two opposed and contrasted aspects. It's very much in concept, but that is something that often divides people. So therefore, dualism. The opposite is the non-duality, and that is very much used in philosophy, where they say, hey, there is this separation is not real. So it's the opposite thinking. So this is more used by people that are more advanced in their spiritual development, and you start thinking about non-duality. It's completely different approach, and it's a bit out of scope of this video, but it's very much worthwhile to know about. Now, on polarity thinking. If you start thinking about polarities, there's so many polarities we use daily without realizing. War and peace, as I just mentioned, logic and creativity, revolution, evolution, rich and poor, control versus chaos, competition versus collaboration. There are a lot of polarities sometimes we don't realize that existing. Can be profit, non-profit. Can be very close polarities, very close to each other, but it can be very wide polarities. For example, political left and political right, and that can also have variations. So, as you can imagine, each polarity also brings with it its own emotions. So people will go for position A, and other people go for position B, and they start getting conflicts with each other. So there's a lot of emotions involved, a lot of, let's say, triggers, disappointment. How can you choose position B or position A, and people get disappointed and people switch positions. So it is a lot of emotions underneath that, and that's something to be aware of. Now, there's also some risks with polarity thinking and errors that comes with it. One is so-called cherry picking. What it means that we go for the best example and we reject everything else. So we select the very best and we ignore everything else, which is already a thinking error. It can also be resulting in positional negotiation, where you go for positions, position A versus position B, and you dig yourself in. It's a really bad form of negotiation, by the way. It results in biases, in golden standards, in groupthink, in exclusion, because you exclude a group, but also exclude yourself in a way. Isolation, it's a lot of judgments, not based on facts. And also the risk of being stuck, because you exclude a group, also information, so therefore you end up with a very limited form of information. So therefore there's a lot of issues with that. Now, for example, this picture is a well-known picture where somebody who would be standing on the left here would see a blue circle. And that person might think, oh, it might be a cylinder, it might be a two-dimensional object like a circle, but also a cylinder. But that person will see a blue circle, while the person standing on the right will see a red box. And that's although from our position, we see both position A and B at the same time. So realize that both position A and position B are both correct. And that is the whole issue here. It's very much about understanding that position A can exist and position B can exist. And instead of deciding between A or B, it can be A and B. And that is a different way of thinking. Ken Wilber, an American philosopher, has been diving into this topic quite intensively. And he also came with the so-called meta-analysis or meta-philosophy, where he zooms out and he said, depending on the layer you look at the situation, you start having different truths or different insights. And a certain layer, people might indeed be in position A and B, or B, A or B. But if you zoom out, you see, there's very much a common ground for both of them. And he has this quote saying, no one is smart enough to be wrong 100% of the time, which is an interesting quote for that. Now, he also links to the so-called inner development. He says, well, when we develop as a young adult, we have in the beginning a bit like this polarity thinking, very strong polarity thinking versus A versus B, A or B. And by getting older and wiser, we understand that both A and B have both truths and them or common ground. So we get to a position of thinking A and B. So by getting more mature and more wiser, you will understand that certain things are not so separate anymore and they're more unified in concept at least. If you're interested in adult development, there are a lot of work done on that. It's fascinating how we develop ourselves in our thinking. But as a let's say university student, it might happen that you think very much in A versus B positioning. And that happens, it's normal. Later in life, you will start understanding it's A and B, and you might have it already in you. But everybody is on a different journey. So therefore, people might be responding differently when there is a polarity thinking or polarities happening. Now, on polarity mapping, there's some tools out there to do polarity mapping. Actually, I'm a co-creator of a book called Street Smart, where I cover this technique a little bit in more detail. And this is about understanding where everybody is regarding their polarities. It pops very much in group discussions, also within ourselves, but to try out, it's best to try it with group conversations where polarities happen. To illustrate a little bit by this picture here, in every conversation, quite a few polarities are popping up. For example, when you have a discussion on immigration, for example, people will have topics like social elements or who should be involved, profit or non-profit. It's about integration. Should integration be allowed or not allowed? So there are a lot of polarities. And some discussion will have be a lot of focus, like bit shown here in green, a lot of green, but some bit less, like in orange, and some bit lesser, more in the underground, like here shown in blue and red. So we have different layers of polarities being discussed in any discussion, and often we don't realize it. So there might be a main theme present, but also might be a lot of sub-themes being present there as well. And trying to recognize them and play with that and noticing them is already a good start. Now, so how do polarity mapping is very much understanding these themes, what's being discussed, there was a main theme and what other themes. And as discussion evolves, other themes might pop up. But it's good to understand, okay, where is everybody on this polarity? A versus B and C versus D and so on and so on and so on. But the idea is to get the full overview. And the tool to use for that is a so-called visual analog scale. And that comes from healthcare, from pain treatment and physicians, that they have so-called scale being used for pain. And pain is also polarity, no pain or a lot of pain. And they use the scale to understand how much pain somebody is having. And they go to a patient and they say, hey, where is your pain? If a patient is complaining, I have a lot of pain. Okay, what is a lot? Give me a number. And some patient might say, look, I have a 7 here. But for another patient for the same type of pain might score 6 or higher. So it's very individual based, but it gives you a good idea of where the pain is. And if the treatment works, the next day that patient might say, well, now I'm at a 2. And you see a lot of changes happening here as well. But the advantage of this VAS scale, this visual analog scale, is you can map out polarities. And for example, just an example, I use here competition versus collaboration. And imagine there is a business case at university being discussed on a company saying, should we compete or should we collaborate? And then you do listen to other participants, then some participant will say, hey, yes, I think we should compete here. I give it a 2. And the other one says, I'll give it a 4. And the other one says, we should collaborate more, and give it an 8. And this is just a rapid way to map out polarities without judgment. It's just a good understanding where everybody is. And this is one topic. The next theme might be profit, non-profit. And again, all these three people discussing this topic might have a different ranking again. So by mapping out all polarities, and any discussion might be 4 or 5 topics, you can understand where everybody is. And by mapping it out on a flip chart and make it visible for everybody, it's often an eye-opener of where everybody is, because people think we align with certain things, but often we don't. And by visualizing this by using this visual analog scale for polarities, it's a very helpful tool to understand where everybody is, and also yourself. So how does it work? Like I said before, is to understand who all the themes are in any discussion, and understand the polarities, but also position all the speakers on this polarity and make it visible for everybody. So, and therefore you get a full overview for that discussion regarding all polarities being discussed and all the positioning for each speaker or each participant in that conversation. And it's a very helpful tool. And also you start zooming out. As soon as you start applying that, you start realizing, oh, wait a minute, so many differences and so many overlaps as well. So you start seeing more nuances in discussions, and it's going to be helpful for you to understand your own thinking and understand the thinking of others, but also the group discussion overall. So it's a very powerful tool. Try it out. Now, a very interesting element is so-called polarity dynamics, because polarities shift over time. And I'll illustrate it by another example. And this is the so-called, I use here centralized versus decentralized. Just to give a polarity, do we have to centralize something or decentralize? In the business, for example, just to imagine an example, a US company has a headquarters in New York, and they're expanding to other countries. They're expanding to Brazil and to Germany and to China and to Australia, you name it. So, and they say, well, New York will be the headquarters, and they will decide for all these countries. So they're centralized. And by doing that, it's a kind of positive setting. They say, yep, it works. We are in control. We decide a strategy. We decide what these countries have to do, things like that. But over time, these countries are doing quite well. Imagine that Brazil is doing well and Australia is doing well. And they say, well, each time we have to go to New York and get let's say, approval for this. And it always the lack of time. And you don't understand our culture. You don't understand our business so well. So instead of being centralized and positive, it becomes more centralized and negative. There's more like a negative aspect to it. And then they say, well, it doesn't work anymore. And after a while in New York, they say, well, we have to change the way we work, because all these countries are doing very well. Brazil is doing great, and Germany is doing great. And yeah, we're slowing them down a little bit. Suddenly decide, let's decentralize. Let's give these countries much more decision-making power. And yeah, and being negative, centralized negative, becomes decentralized positive. Oh yes, it's working very fine. It's brilliant. We're so happy about that. Decentralized, we make our decisions, and New York is still important for the counting and things like that and the overview. But okay, we're doing our great work. But after a while, New York is noticing that these countries are getting more and more to the negative side because they're not reporting so well. They have maybe their own. They're not unified anymore. Every country does its own stuff. So it has an impact on the branding and maybe also the business, on the global picture. Instead of being positive, decentralized positive becomes negative. And after a while, New York says, look guys, you had all this power. It's not going to work anymore. We have to centralize everything again, because that is the way to go forward. That's where we are now. And it becomes centralized positive again. Again, we start at the beginning. You might think this dance is just an example, an imaginary example, but it happens very frequently, and I'll give some other examples. For example, elections. In every country, as long as it's democratic at least, the left party wins. People are very happy. Oh yes, the left party, we're so happy about this, and yada. And then they start implementing the ideas, and then after a couple of years, people start complaining because it's not working so well. So it becomes a negative. And the next elections, you can imagine, the right-oriented parties are winning and say, yes, we're going to make great change. And they win big with big numbers. So they become right-oriented, in their political agenda. And they're so positive about it. And they start implementing, but then they see the negative sides as well. After a while, these people are very fed up about it. The population says, look, guys, I mean, you had all this time, but now you're doing really, really bad. We have to go to the left again. So from left to right, from left to right, from left to right. We've seen it so many times in history, but that is actually the explanation of it. A lot of other examples are available. I'll give you here 2 more. Going back to the office for management with COVID, it can be a one-time cycle, but you see this swing movement back and forward. Tax breaks or no tax breaks. And when I was writing this slide deck, I just popped up. I came across it as a Fortune magazine. Let's say I think it was Instagram post saying that Portugal just became a bit less friendly to digital nomads as country plans to end foreign tax breaks. So what happened? They had these tax breaks to attract these digital nomads and to bring in money because they spend money in Portugal and they spend it on housing and rent and whatever, shopping. They spend money, they might buy houses even. But then they say after a while, we have to change that. We have to tax them. So it's again a movement back and forward between tax breaks and no tax breaks. So this movement, this pendulum almost from left and right and up and down, it's a very, very common what you see when you deal with polarities. So although polarities might be sound like to be fixed in time, you see a lot of shifting over time as well. So that concludes the polarity dance together with polarity mapping. So do understand that polarity is not an evil animal, but it's a funny thing to watch. Now you understand how it's happening. It's a brilliant concept to understand and to apply in your own thinking and when you have a conversation with somebody else, especially in a group, because it's brilliant. I mean, this will clarify a lot of your thinking, your view on the world, and also your studies, because your studies might be relevant for that. If you study anything with political related, this is very much relevant for you. So have a look at it. Start looking at news with fresh eyes, because it will open your world in a big time. So have a look at it. Let me know in the comment how it's going. If you're surprised by some of these polarities, let me know how it's going. See you later for more.